Hi, everybody, and welcome. Today, I am joined by Brian O'Shea, who is an osteopath that I graduated with. So it's been very exciting, very fun to be able to connect to you like this, Brian.
Good morning. How are you?
Good, good, really good. How are you?
Very well.
Yeah. So we studied together, we graduated together, and we made it through 4 years of of training. I almost feel like it's comparable to almost like army training, where some.
Yeah, yeah. I like your description of we made it through. It's like clearly, subconsciously, it was an ordeal.
Well, I mean, it was worth it at the end, but there was definitely times where I didn't think I was gonna get through this.
No.
And it was just having like people like you around who were so helpful and kind and great to bounce ideas off, especially when you had patients in clinic. Like I have no idea what to do with this person. And so having people like you around was so helpful for me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that was. I, I think there was two aspects to it. We were a very large cohort, which to some degree had its downsides in that we were like fighting for patients and things because there's only so many patients, so many clinic rooms, and so on. So there's logistical issues there. But the positive side was you had 30 something people and you had 30 something opinions, and a lot of time you get completely swamped. Not you particularly, but all of us. We get swamped with that sea of opinion. But equally, that also was incredibly helpful because you would kind of go, oh, actually, I hadn't thought about that, or oh, I hadn't thought about that, or oh, yeah, that's a really relevant point as well. So there was pros and cons there, I think.
Yeah, and that's not even including the opinions of the tutors,
Yeah, well,
which is a whole different thing entirely.
yeah, and 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 I think even there was you had people who were much more willing to move with how osteopathy was moving, how medicine was moving, how research was moving. And then you also had people that were stuck to a philosophical belief or either had a view that was founded in their training, which was X number of years previously, or their particular experience in their private practice. And sometimes that was being polite, a challenge, shall we say.
Do you think that's reflective of the training of osteopathy as a whole or more of an institution?
Um, Good question. I think it's a bit of both, really. I think there is because there's different strands in it. Kind of there's the osteopathy umbrella, but then there's different. I think there's belief systems probably is, and there's different probably philosophies more than belief systems really, but there's different. I think each institution trains differently. I think the way BCom trains where we studied was very different to my understanding of the way the UCO trains. There was people in our year who had done a period of time at the UCO either as a foundation course or X number of years of training, and when you spoke to them, they would say, yes, it's a very different approach to training. Your training is reflective of the philosophy and the history of that particular school. Because when you look back, they were all founded ultimately, they were all founded by people who just disagreed with each other, didn't they? And went off and going, I'm forming my own school and I'm not talking to him anymore or them anymore. So they went off and done that. So you will get that difference in it. And and I think that's really valuable because that's the history, that's the heritage in any organization, and especially in an academic school. I think what osteopathy needs to be is it needs to be really careful that it isn't left behind because the world is moving to evidence-based medicine. And to some degree, even you may not believe that that's the right thing for osteopathy, that it shouldn't be based on evidence or it shouldn't be based on trials and research and so on and so forth, because it's very difficult for osteopathy to sort of to have research to support it and so on. But that's the way the world is moving, I think. Yeah, or that's what I've seen in the last year when you come out into the real world, out of the bubble of being trained, and you follow sort of, if you look at Instagram accounts or Facebook or whatever it is, it's there's a very strong move towards clinical. It's clinical, it's clinical. And I imagine that's your experience in the NHS, that it's a very different thing to working in private practice.
Absolutely. Obviously, I'm embedded in a musculoskeletal service in the NHS. I work alongside physiotherapists, and I think their training is very much evidence-based led.
Yeah.
Whereas whilst ours has those caveats, it's, there's this nuance of where we trained of naturopathy, and those veins run through our training as well, which sometimes isn't as, evidence-based, or at least current research-based. And so I think that's somehow where we can sometimes lack.
Yeah.
I don't know if you'd agree with that.
Yeah, I would. I think that's quite right. And I think, but what we found was that in our last sort of in the final 2 years, that the college BCom was moving to a stronger sort of evidence based, and I think that was reflective of some of the changes in the senior levels in management, and and their history and their work and what their sort of work history was. So I was moving much more to evidence based. I think what I found with that was, I had no problem with that. That was absolutely fine. I think that's actually the right way to go, to tell you the truth, is that the evidence and the research and that approach to training, it has to be relevant to osteopathy. It has to be relevant to what we were doing. So to me, I thought that there was, in our research projects, I felt it was pretty easy to get, not easy, sorry, that's the wrong phrase, but the scope of what we could do research on, to me, felt very, very broad. So for our final thing, but I think that that's reflective of the curriculum at BCom, which is very, very broad. As you said, it encompasses naturopathy at one end through to, orthopedics at the other end, and they are very, very they're very different things, really, and consequently we had a very broad scope which we could do our research projects on. And some of them were, incredibly specific, related to musculoskeletal research, whereas others were related. I know you done one related to psychology of people with lower back pain, whereas I done one which was, quite reductionist in terms of testing palpatory sensibility over the 4 years. So, and there's real positives to that. But there's also that sort of very, very broad scope means that, how relevant is the research we're doing to the career that we're training for?
Yeah. And so do you think almost we could use some of that research, or I suppose, use some of that research to almost help propel the profession forward, rather than just pick things that we have a personal connection to and we'd find interesting?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I absolutely think yes. But then again, it always had to be, and my lead supervisor, I mean, was exceptionally good, because, and incredibly pragmatic with the approach, and kept saying is, it's undergraduate research. It's undergraduate research, which I think is a polite way of kind of going, your research isn't going to be that great, because you're not a researcher and you're not doing it under, incredibly strict clinical guidelines that you would see on published reports. But then again, BCom does have a history of, there has been a lot of research published historically, which is a good thing. And I do think that osteopathy is lacking in research.
Why
But it's a very because I think ultimately there is, when you come out of college, you have to earn a living. I mean, so that kind of drives sort of osteopaths going into the working world. And as an associate, when you go into the working world, you will work incredibly long hours. And then there is a point where, if you have built up a practice and so on and so forth, unless you have a a desire to do research. There's economic drivers, there's time drivers, there's family drivers, there's all those things that is inhibiting somebody kind of going, yeah, I'm going to walk away from all that and I'm going to go and do research, I think. There's also, I think, my understanding, again, is, I could be wrong on this, is that there is limited kind of central available funding to do that research. And most, when you look at pharma research done by drug companies and so on, the amount of money they spend on research versus what's a successful item comes out of it, if they get 1 in 10 or 1 in 20 or 1 in 100 or whatever it is, that pays for everything for the next 25 years and so on is. So if there was more central funding made available, be it through, the Institute of Osteopathy or GOSC or whoever. I mean, it wouldn't be GOSC because that's not their job. Their job is to protect the public. I think it would drive it forward. If it's left up to individual osteopaths to do it, I think it's always going to be sparse because people just don't have the means, the personal means to do it. We're entering into a profession to earn a living.
Yeah, and that's a really good point because it's not from a lack of institutions, because we have, the IO. There is, I think it's NCOR.
Yeah.
Who facilitate research as well. We certainly have individual osteopaths who are at the forefront of developing research. But like you said, we've got to earn a living. And as an associate, you're not going to do that very easily, at least not in the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're a small profession. That's why there's keeping number, isn't there? There's about 5,000 practicing osteopaths in the UK. I was listening to Chief Executive NatWest saying this morning, they have 10,000 people that work in their branches. They kind of, and then they have what it's like 20 or 30,000 people who work in back office and working, and so that organization, that bank, has twice as many people working in their branches than there are osteopaths who have completed, a minimum of 3 years, probably 4 years training. We're still a very, very small profession. When you look at accountants or look at lawyers, there's like tens of bloody thousands of them there.
Yeah. And speaking of training, you clearly, we're not 18-year-olds, both of us. We didn't come into training fresh out of school. You had this whole other career before you trained as an osteopath.
Yes, I worked in sort of business. Kind of, I qualified as a chartered certified accountant, like 90 or 90, somewhere early 91, 92, something like that. So I'd worked in business for best part maybe 25 years at a fairly senior level, and I got to that point where I just thought there was a number of reasons, really. There was very practical reasons of the company I worked for was moving in a direction that I had zero interest in. So I kind of got to the thing and said, well, I don't really want to work for this particular company because the area of business it's moving into is of no interest to me. And that's very difficult to go in and do 40, 50, 60, 70 hours a week doing something that you have like zero interest in. So I was kind of got to that point and said, well, I can go and I can switch companies and I can go and do the same thing somewhere else. I just thought, really? Do I want to do that? And I had when you used to speak to people in our year, bless you, when you speak to people in our year was, other than people that had kind of come straight out of A levels and had went into it, anyone that was sort of had any, experience between sort of secondary school and osteopathy, a lot of them had a very common thing of their their first experience or their experience of osteopathy was related to when they had injured themselves in some shape or some shape or another, and that was reflected also in a lot of the tutors. It was like, why did you become an osteopath? Oh, I used to play sport, or I was a dancer, and then I managed to, bust both my knees or whatever it was, and I went to saw an osteopath. And in my case, I had a number of quite serious motorcycle accidents, and you'd expect that I would have learned after the first one not to buy any more motorbikes. That didn't register at all. So I just kept buying them, and I kept crashing them, and so I had a really good experience of osteopathy. I tried other modalities. I tried physiotherapy and I tried chiropractors, and this isn't saying anything negative about them. Was it didn't work for me. That particular modality just didn't work for me, and I think I was very lucky in that I found an osteopath who it did work for me, and the thing I noticed about them was they were very, very interested at consultation about my work life and my home life and the context of my injuries within my work life and my home life. So it was like, yeah, you've completely buggered your back and, whatever, but how does that affect you in terms of your home life? Because I had 4 small kids at that point. And how does it affect you when you're working 70 hours a week? So, and they were they made up, other than when I was asleep, they made up 99% of my waking hours. I was either at work or I was with a large young family, and then the whole treatment was based around that: how to improve that working, how to improve that home life. And that really resonated with me. That absolutely resonated with me. And I just kept, every time then I would have another horrible bloody accident, I would go back to them and they would kind of sort me out. And then I would sort of keep going through. And eventually sort of, that guy retired. I mean, he must have been in his 80s when I kind of saw him first, but he was still kind of going for probably 7, 8, 9 years after that. And so when I wanted to make that change, I thought, do I just want to go and do the same thing somewhere else, just do more finance director in a different company? Or the kids have grown up, they've mostly buggered off. I've now got an opportunity to do something else. I will be honest, I didn't think it was going to be as bloody hard as it was. Yep. I really didn't think.
I absolutely agree.
I remember talking to my partner, Sophie, and going, this is going to be great. It's going to be fantastic. It's going to be good university. I'm going to have so much free time. I'm going to have a complete work-life balance. I'm not going to be working weekends. I'm not going to be doing this and that and the other. And it was like, I just replaced doing 70 hours a week work with 70 hours a week, either being at college or studying or doing the endless exams that we had to do in first year and second year. So I think that's for future students, I think that's a really important thing, is to understand that if it's an incredibly difficult course, it really is. And I think it's, the intensity of the course isn't, I don't think, recognized subsequently. If you say to somebody, I'm a lawyer or I'm an accountant, people instantly can sort of understand and visualize the difficulty of your training to get to you that point. Whereas if you're an osteopath, they have no concept of kind of all that academic stuff that we had to do through those 4 years.
Yeah, and certainly I remember talking to GPs whilst we were doing our training, even after, and they had no idea that we did cranial nerve testing and we did pathology and diagnosis and we analyzed diet diaries and we did all these other things on top of the medical sciences that we took whilst training. So absolutely agree. And I'm really glad you said that, because a lot of people will come into, or apply for the profession thinking, oh, it's like a normal uni degree, I'm going to get days off, and it's far from it. And I don't think that's
No.
specific to our university. I think it's just any osteopathic institution is going to be like that. I don't think it was just ours. Whereas, I mean, I did my first degree in psychology, and it was, in comparison, holy moly, like I had days off. We didn't get a single day off at BCom.
No, no. And the other thing is that is what people don't forget is, or what people don't realize is you have that, it's that mental. So it's that it's you have that mental fatigue by the time you get to the end of the year, but also because we have to develop what's essentially a manual skill, you know, is and we and you do that by practice. And so when physically, it's incredibly physically demanding as well, both as you as a practitioner and as when you're training, because you know you do it by repetition over and over and over and over again. But it's also incredibly physically demanding because you have to act as a model for your colleagues. So what you're having in, and if you kind of think about it, is by the end of year 4, you know, we're good at our technique. Our, you know, let's be honest, we are good at our technique and we can do it and we don't hurt people. That's not what it was in first year, you know, where we're learning it from absolute scratch and we're doing mobilizations and so on. And then in second year, when we're doing, you know, HVTs and so on and so forth, is you're learning it. So the very first time you learn it, or the very first time you do it, you know, be honest, we are not good at it, you know, and we're more likely to kind of, you know, twist somebody's neck and sort of put it over, lock it, and so on and so forth. By the time we get to year 4, that's done. So it's an incredibly physically demanding course, and it's incredibly mentally demanding. So you sort of come out the end, and by the end of year 4, and you just think, oh, I'm just completely knackered
I do
and
miss,
broken.
I would say I do miss, you know, having my every joint, literally every joint in my body mobilized or cavitated,
Yeah.
HVT. What was that like in terms of your own body, you know, being a therapist and then being worked on for continuously over 4 years, and now maybe not having that on your body as much?
During while we were doing the training was I found it wasn't a kind of universal. It wasn't universally good. It wasn't universally bad across the whole thing. Different. I found that different parts of my body, and this has been the same throughout my whole treatment. When I used to get treatment from when I had the injuries and stuff like that, was certain treatments I respond incredibly well to. You know, I love having my neck cracked. I get, and I know all the research says that it's all, you know, only 5 minutes, you know, and so on and so forth. But for me, but research is starting to show now that there's actually a huge psychological element to it as well. You know, and if something makes you feel better, you generally feel better, don't you? You know, it's like, you know, a bag of crisps makes me feel better, and therefore I feel better. It's all in my head and things, but nonetheless, that's absolutely fine. Coming out afterwards, I think, and working in private practice, where, you know, pre-COVID, where you will be doing back-to-back patients, you know, across 6 or 7 hours, I would feel broken at the end of that. But I think the one thing I would say is that you get used to it incredibly quickly, because, and if you remember during our training, we were always like posture, 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 get your head up, stop looking at the floor, do this, you know, you're arching your back, and the tutors will come and move you around. But because we might only do 2 hours of practice in a day, and maybe across that 2 hours, we might actually only do an hour because we'd have to be shown how to do it and so on and so forth, is that you really wouldn't take any notice of it, or I didn't at least, because I wouldn't feel any aches and pains from the fact that my head was down or I was twisted or whatever it was, or my back what it was. But when you go into private practice and you've adopted that weird position, you know, across 10 or 12 patients back to back, you suddenly very quickly realize that the plinth is just a bit too low, or the plinth is a bit too high, or you're leaning too far forward. You know, your body tells you that. And also part of our training is, you know, we become so attuned to every tiny little niggle.
Absolutely. And I think it was so important what you said before was, you know, and how powerful it is when you become attuned to that and you can recognize that in yourself. And then, so if you can do it for yourself, then you can then empathize or put yourself in that situation for your patients as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there was, because I've thought this about this quite a lot. And I remember saying it at the time when I was a BCom, was that there was the vast majority of our cohort were young people. So somewhere between age 18 to 21, 22. I don't really know what the you know the percentage split was, but that was the vast majority of it. And it was that point you made there just about empathy and understanding and so on and so forth. And I was continually absolutely astounded by the young people in our year, you know, where the patients, and maybe it was just the patients that BCom gets, you know, you would get a lot of patients, and especially with that link to the Camden CC, the trust or whatever it was, that when we had the NHS patients coming across, um, and and the problems that those patients had, be it psychological, be it lifestyle, be it, you know, whatever, over and above that particular MSK issue that they were coming to see us with, you know, and then they would come and they would kind of rattle off that list of medication that people were playing and so on and things. I was just absolutely astounded by the ability of 20, 21-year-olds in our year to be able to deal with all that. And I was kind of, you know, hats off to them. That because you just think that level of maturity that they had to deal with that. And I imagine some were kind of going, oh my God, what am I dealing with this? But you know, they would never visualize or sort of display that in front of patients and things. And that was astounding. That was absolutely astounding. And the thing going in as a sort of mature student is that you kind of, if you're sensible, you can feed off that energy. And I think what's the one bit of advice that I would give to any mature student, anyone that's mature that's thinking into osteopathy, is that, you know, I think it's very important to don't be the grumpy, cynical old bugger in the corner, right? You know, because the vast majority of the people that you're going to be studying with are going to be young people. Let them become cynical, grumpy old buggers in their own time. You know, it's it's not your job. And actually, if you kind of shut up and listen and keep your grumpy, cynical old bugger opinions to yourself, you learn so much. You absolutely do. You see a whole new perspective in the world, which you generally wouldn't get to see, because you won't get to see that from your kids because it's an entirely different dynamic. And if you're coming from business or, you know, another profession, then you're maybe at a more senior level than you would be dealing with the young people who have joined the organization. So you don't get that exposure there. And that's hugely rewarding. It's hugely enlightening to see that.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear because I thought what you did really well was you meshed really well with everybody, be it the younger sort of ages of a cohort with the older, because there were some of us that were slightly older, like 30s and above. Um, but what struck me was, you know, you went out with everyone. We went to the pub, we went to parks, we studied together. There was never, for me, this sort of barrier of, oh, you're a mature student. It was just all of us in it together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that I think that was absolutely critical to it, because the thing is, you're not going to get through this course by yourself, or you wouldn't get through that course by yourself. And I think it's really important, because you establish that kind of, it's like working in a team, isn't it? You establish a complete team ethos. And you'll have individual groups, and that's entirely understandable because people will be more drawn to other people who have similar outlooks or whatever it is. And I think the other thing that was really, really helpful as well was you had lots of different nationalities. So, and I think that worked. I mean, when you looked at our cohort, there was, there was Brazilians, there was Hungarians, there was Italian, there was Spanish, there was French, there was English, there was Irish, there was Scottish, there was anyone Welsh?
American.
There was American. There was a whole range, and they bring their culture and they bring their views as well, and that's really, really good as well, because while osteopathy is kind of an academic, there's an academic medical clinical element to it, and then there's all the manual therapy as well. Ultimately you're dealing with the public, and if an American comes through the door, you need to be able to connect to that person. You need to have a level of understanding. I mean, it kind of helps if you know where America is, at a basic thing. But if French people come through, because there was French people in our year, you learn an element about that French culture or the Italian culture, or be it the Hungarian or the Brazilian, or whatever it is, you learn that, and whether you consciously or subconsciously, you will absorb that.
Especially being in London. I mean,
yes,
it's so multicultural anyway. We have all these nationalities that were walking through the door anyway. So I think, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And having obviously, with hindsight, everything is different. But I was having a conversation with somebody else, and they did a part-time course. And so thinking back, if you had to do it again, I won't ask if you would do it again, because that's probably a loaded question that I probably wouldn't be able to answer. Well, I think I know what I would say, but if you had to decide between sort of doing it again as a full-time or a part-time course, do you think you would have changed anything?
For me personally, I think I would do it full-time. It's just, it kind of what you said earlier about, getting through this, is that, there is no two ways about it. It is not kind of a jolly fest from the day you come in to the day you leave, right? Despite the photos and the brochures and on the websites of students sitting around smiling and so on and so forth and so on, mostly it's students, with their head down studying, just trying to get through this. And I think with part-time, I mean, hats off to people that do it part-time. I have no idea how they can do it part-time. The intensity of the course itself, and then actually having to work as well, and doing it over that 6 years. I'd have found that very, very difficult, and I probably would have given up, to tell you the truth. But I suppose that depends on the nature of the job that you're doing in addition to your study as well. But also, I think that the way the part-time works is that it can kind of, other than that manual element and all the technique and stuff that we learn, and the clinical training, and I know with the part-time courses, they become a lot less part-time when you get to the latter stages, because you got to get your clinical hours, you got to get your practice in, you got to do all those things. So I think if you could get to that point, you'd probably finish it. I personally would have found it incredibly difficult, given the amount of time that we work. But I do think there's an element of that that's partly driven by the institution that we went to. So I remember thinking about the exams and stuff, and I remember saying at one point, kind of the head of osteopathy, where I said, look, in our first year, where there was nothing, I can't remember the thing, but it's essentially the mocks. By the time we got to year 3, possibly, where you kind of have, your OT exams, your technique exams, the first 2 would be mocks, and the final one then will be the proper assessed one. We didn't have that in year 1. And I remember counting it and kind of counting across between OT exams, soft tissue exams, written exams, coursework, essays, whatever it was, we essentially had an exam every 1.5 weeks. You
Wow.
know, we had, it was like 23 or 24 exams across a 38-week period. So it's just, sorry, I've got a cat here that won't bugger off. Let me get rid of it. So we kind of, you know, that's nuts, really. That's absolutely nuts.
Yeah.
You're learning to pass exams. You're not learning for the sake of learning.
Well, and this is my thing. So having, I mean, been in practice now for maybe just under a year, um, how was that translated for you from going from that theoretical and lots of practical to now being in private practice on your own with patients in terms of that knowledge base?
So some things, I, it's it's been very different. So, and I think is the two things I think you can compare is when we were in clinic in year 4 with dealing with patients coming in, all be it new consultations or be it treatments versus working in private practice, is that, and in our training, the clue is kind of in the word title training, is we're there to be trained and so on, and the safety of the patient is paramount and so on and so forth. But there is a very, very strong emphasis on this is a training institution, and it's kind of, it's for the benefit of the student, you know. But yes, you do have to treat the patient. Yes, you do have to try and alleviate their pain. Yes, you have to do all their concerns and so on. But it's very much of within a training context. In private practices, I found the patients come in and they want to know what's causing the pain, how can they stop doing it again, and how are you going to make that pain go away really quickly. And that's kind of what it is. And that's what they want. And they don't want, you know, because they're paying hard-earned money to you, and they want, it's a results-driven business. You know, it really is. It's kind of, I always feel that is, yeah, and there's always exceptions and things, but you've essentially got 3 treatments to get them an awful lot better. That's your window.
Yeah.
That's what they want to see. And so I think that's the biggest difference, is that there is a shift from in the teaching college, the emphasis is on the student. In practice, the emphasis is on the patient.
And how do you manage those expectations in private practice where you are under more pressure to get people better, to get them to self-manage, to educate, and do all these things within these half hour or an hour, depending on where you practice, these treatments?
I think it's the fundamental thing is you absolutely have to be completely honest with the patient, completely honest with the patient. So if somebody comes in and they've kind of, if they've had, and they say, I've had this pain for 5 years, you have to be really honest up front and say, I'm not going to make this go away in essentially an hour and a half over 3 treatments. It's not going to happen. You've had it for 5 years. I'm not going to be able to unwind that in an hour and a half. You know, we might be able to do it in 6 treatments. We might be able to do it in 7 treatments. But to achieve that, there's a very, you know, you're going to have to do some work as well. I, there's some tricks that we kind of get taught is in the final years was, and they're very subtle things, but I think they make an enormous difference, is things like, I never prescribe exercise. I prescribe movements. Because people go, exercise, well, isn't that running up and down the road and getting hot and sweaty? You know, that's kind of what people see as the word exercise. So I'll always talk about movements. I want you to do these movements. And also, I think it's getting them to do things that doesn't mean they have to spend money, buy specialist equipment, take out a gym membership. You know, it's getting them to do things that has the least impact on their day-to-day schedule. So it's like, you can do this before you get out of bed. You know, you can do this when you're sitting down at work. You can do this when you're sitting watching TV. I want you to do this. Or all I want you to do is get up and walk around for 2 minutes every hour. That's all you have to do. You know, and people will do that. Is if you go, well, you've got to buy this band, and then you've got to go buy a kettlebell, and then what I want you to do this, and I want you to do that, and I want you to do those things. Is, you know, they'll come back the following week, go, yeah, I was doing it, definitely I was doing it, and you go, show me, and
They were not doing it.
and they weren't doing it.
Or they've come up with some new variation that you've never actually even seen.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Is like, think, that's interesting.
I think it's such an important shift that what you were describing is you went from exercise-based interventions, which we were taught at school, at university, to movement. And I think that's such a more powerful way to prescribe movements that people aren't going to have this, or some people aren't going to have this barrier to.
Yes, yeah, and it's like the I just, with a lot of ones, is with things like lower back pain or hip pain or knee pain or whatever, really, is I say to people is just walk more. Yeah, we're designed to walk more, you know. So that's what our function really is. And I just go, just walk more, just walk for 20 minutes, 20 minutes a day. And where you will have, and with people where they have very, very acute pain, is, I think the other thing is you have to give them realistic goals. I mean, I do, I'll follow sort of the osteopathy hashtags and so on Instagram and Facebook and so on and so forth. And I always find it really amusing where you'll have osteopaths going, oh, here's some exercises for sciatic pain. If you've got sciatic pain, do these. And you just, and I got some last year. I'd never had it before. And I got a disc bulge sort of, it was just before I was about to start going in my clinic. So I had to delay going in for a month. And I had it for two weeks, sciatic pain. And I have, you know, all my sporting injuries, and I played, you know, Gaelic football, full contact sports as a young man, you know, motorcycle injuries and so on. I have never experienced pain as I did with sciatic pain. And I mean, it was to the point of one day the pain was so bad. I remember it was the pain, I just got this shooting pain that it was so bad, my legs just buckled underneath me and I just went bang and hit the floor. And then you'll see on Instagram somebody going, like yesterday I saw somebody going, sciatic pain is, you know, stand on your good leg and then bring your other knee up to your chest. And I'm just thinking, like, you've never had sciatic pain. The best you can do is kind of get through the day without breaking down and crying when you've got it. And I found the best single thing for that was just walk. You know, you would be in agony for 20 minutes, but then it would start easing off and easing off. And it was like, it would disappear. And then as soon as I became, you know, a more or sedentary again, pain back instantly. So I think what's incredibly helpful in osteopathy is if the practitioner has some experience of that particular instance, whether it is back pain, neck pain, shoulder pain, elbow pain, whatever it is, you know, you can absolutely relate to what that patient is experiencing. And I think you can also then say, look, this worked for me. I done this and it worked for me. That doesn't mean it would work for them. And unfortunately, with that sort of thing is that just comes with experience. That just comes with sort of years on the planet. The longer you're here, the more likely you are to do something to yourself. But I do with acute pain is you have to give you've got to give realistic goals. Absolutely. So it is like, I just want you to walk 5 minutes from the house and walk 5 minutes back. Tomorrow, make that 7 minutes. The day after, make it 9 minutes. Kind of, if somebody's in acute pain and saying, I want you to walk for an hour,
That's very Andy Mansfield of you. I never thought I'd ever say that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a good thing. That's a good thing if he's listening. Yeah, absolutely. And in that case, I suppose I'm the best person to treat fractures because that's what I keep doing to my body.
Yeah, especially your fingers.
Yeah, fingers you can't see right now, but I've got a moon boot on because I've got a stress fracture in my foot. Playing volleyball. As an osteopath, please don't go play volleyball.
Yeah.
Not a good idea.
Yeah, I think but unfortunately that's just experience, and that comes with, if you're 22 or 23, you get injured and you just spring back, don't you? As your powers of recovery are incredible when you're in 20s, and you just pop back and things. It becomes, as you get older, the chance of getting injured becomes higher, and the recovery time takes longer.
Excuse me.
Bless you. And I think that just helps. That absolutely helps.
Yeah. And so what are the typical type of patients that you're seeing in private practice or pre-lockdown in private practice?
It's the classic back pain. It really is the absolute classic back pain, either lower back pain or mid back pain. And then in a lot of things it's it's driven by occupation. So it is either sedentary, either I get up, I kind of have my breakfast, I do this, I travel to work, I sit in the bus or I sit in the tube or I stand in the tube and I go and I sit down for 6, 7, 8 hours, and I come home and I do some chores and activities around the house, and then I sit down and I watch TV. Or people go to the gym and so on. And so it's like I go to the gym and I lift heavy things or whatever they do for that hour, 2 hours or whatever it is a week. But predominantly their life is of a sedentary nature. Or they're doing manual labor, which involves repetitive activities, like painters and decorators or window cleaners or, carpet fitters who will be doing that same repetitive activity. And they're putting their backs in a position that just causes stress on the back. So that's very much as around that. And again, you get people, their necks all kind of just tighten up and so on, and using computers where you're essentially in that position, shoulders rolled in. Overwhelmingly, I would say the vast majority of patients. But then you will get patients who will come in things like plantar fasciitis or metatarsalgia or something like that as well, or golfers, tennis players, very much that classic. The big difference, I think, that I found in private practice between versus the patients we had in training is it was I think, very common for when we were doing our training, and especially those patients that were coming through the NHS, for those to have systemic problems. Just rarely you see it. And the medication lists in private practice are generally a fraction of what they were for our training. I mean, is that the same experience you've had?
Yeah, so it's a bit different for us because obviously they have to go via GPs or some of them are self-referred. So by the time they see us, it's 6 to 8 weeks. So they're no longer in that acute phase.
Yeah.
They're in that subacute or even chronic phase. So I agree. I don't see as many systemic issues as much as we did during training. But especially, and this is probably with some of the older patients that come in, their list of medications can be a mile long. And, and this is where I'm really thankful that we had all this pharmacology in training, because sometimes, their neuropathies can be caused by the medication.
Yeah.
And if you don't know that, you're just going to be treating them until the sun comes down and they won't get any better.
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, but in private practice, what I found was that the patients, because they're coming to pay, have generally they're of a higher socioeconomic position, and consequently, their general overall health is going to be better than the patients we used to get in our training as well. But I think because you're in the NHS, you will see, it's kind of a continuation really of, it's a similar patient profile as we had at BCom.
Absolutely. And so, thinking of that first sort of year now in practice, what were your expectations when you graduated before you started working in private practice? And have those expectations changed a year in?
I think if you had asked me, I think if you said, what's your expectations when we were in year one about going into private practice versus expectations when we were in year 4, I think when we got to year 4 and you're in clinic and you have a lot more time with the tutors on a day-to-day clinical, in the clinic basis, they have a lot more time and they can tell you what it's like in private practice. And there is an element of preparing us for private practice in year 4. So I think that, and a lot of those ideas that we would have had in year 1, they kind of get washed away somewhat by the time you get to year 4, and you have a much more realistic view of it. And you do realize that, I think if you come out of year 4 and you haven't realized that it is a results-based business where you have to get people better and you have to get them better quickly. You don't have to cure them, for want of a better phrase, but they need to see an absolute improvement between the first visit and the second visit. I think the thing that really struck me is that the difference is you are completely on your own, and it is entirely your own decision making. That's it. Even when we were in year 4, and even when we had done our FCCs, we still had to kind of take the case history, go and talk to the tutor, come up, give a list of differentials, come back, do the testing, blah, 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 etc., and then go through all that. Whereas you walk in and from the very first patient, you're in the room by yourself with that patient. And it's all you. We know that it's going to be just us in the room with that patient. But until you do it, until it's that first time, it's still a shock, isn't it?
Absolutely, because I started off in private practice when we graduated, and that first patient ever that you get, and there's no one to call, it can be a little scary.
Yeah.
It's empowering though, because all of a sudden you don't have to call a tutor in if you want to do HVT. It's your clinical judgment, and you can just do it.
Yeah, completely. Yeah. And the other thing, that the one thing that I would say was that while I think we were in year 4, there was a degree of pressure on us to ensure that actually when the patient came in for whatever I can't remember, it was an hour or an hour and 20 minutes, whatever, an hour I think was the first, whenever it was that there was some pressure on us to get treatment in that first consultation. But we kind of get a little bit of challenge if we didn't get it in, and some tutors would be a lot more saying, you should have treated, you need to treat in that, you need to get it done. In private practice, that's not negotiable. I found that wasn't negotiable, that in that hour, you need to get at least 20 minutes treatment in, and I think, that, and I think patients expect that as well.
Yeah, because now they're paying hard-earned money. They want results,
exactly.
results driven.
Yeah, It's the ones who clearly are frustrated by the fact that you're having to do this consultation, and they're trying to climb on the couch, and you're going to go, no, I need to ask you these questions.
In order to
They're
be
going, yeah,
safe.
but I just got pain shoulder. I just got pain in my shoulder.
Yeah, and there are protocols in place for a reason.
Yes. Yeah.
Whether it's safety or assessment driven, this is the procedure, and that's how it works.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think you explain, and if you explain that to patients, that like 99 out of 100 are completely reasonable, and they go, okay, yeah, now when you say, look, it's for your own, it's for, I need to determine whether you're safe to examine and safe to treat. And as soon as you kind of do that, people do accept it.
And looking back, is there anything that you would have liked to have known when you were graduating that you learned or listened to others now?
I think some of our, I think on specific to our training, I would have, there was elements of our training, I think I just didn't see the relevance to it. And at the time, and whilst it was all interesting and it's all knowledge and so on, I didn't feel it was particularly relevant to what we were doing, or what we would be doing in the future. And I think there's some gaps in it. One area I think that would have really liked, it would be a stronger emphasis on exercise rehabilitation. That would have been really, really helpful. Now, to some degree, technology can alleviate that, because there's so many of those rehab systems you can buy, which, because it's a bit of technology, it's a bit of IT, and it's essentially data, it's so easy to kind of go, lower back pain, and then it'll just list all the exercises that somebody else has put the intelligence into and the thinking to go, here's 50 different lower back exercises you can have for that particular person. So, but I don't think technology never replicates knowledge.
No.
Sorry, it never replaces knowledge, I think. So that's one area I think we would have hugely benefited, absolutely benefited from.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what kind of courses or books are you reading now that have not just filled in that gap of knowledge, but just get you excited in general in terms of the profession?
So I respond much better to either courses or watching things. Reading stuff, not particularly, not great for me. So it's just not how I've ever learned on that. So I've done a number of courses, and I quite like, I really like technique courses, because that's ultimately what we're doing. I think I also like sort of short where you'll get videos and so on, 10, 15 minutes, that's addressing a specific issue, be it sort of ankylosing spondylitis, or be it cord equina or something like that, where it is kind of, here's the key information that you need to learn on that. I find those really, really beneficial. And again, there's so much available on the internet that it takes quite a bit of effort to sort of cut through stuff that isn't so good to find the valuable things. And I think the other thing is that, there's endless osteopaths, there's endless things you can follow, physios, chiropractors, everything else on Instagram or Facebook and so on. But with a lot of those is they're either trying to flog you something, so there's a kind of business driver behind it or a revenue driver behind it, or it's coming back to that philosophical belief that they have or they have got a very strong bias towards a particular thing. And I think is with an osteopath, I think it's really important that it needs to resonate with you. Because if it doesn't resonate with you, no matter how good it is, you're not going to put it into practice. You know, I'll watch things and I think, yeah, I get that, I understand it, but yeah, not for me, you know. So I think that's quite a difficult thing. There's so much information out there, but how much of it is valuable is another thing.
Yeah, and how much of it is applicable straight after you do
Yeah,
it? Because I've
I
done
think
courses
applicable is
where,
the right word. Yeah.
yeah, where you come out of it, it's interesting, it's great, but how do I use this now with my patient on a Monday morning?
Yes. Yeah. Or it's incredibly specific, and to that point is applicable. You just think, yeah, I'll remember that when that 1 in 1,000 patients comes through. And the other thing, like I was saying earlier about those things where you see osteopaths and doing little videos prescribing certain exercises and things, is it's again is going, are you going to get a 50-year-old bloke to do that? You know, a guy who was a builder, or, you know, a, a woman who's been a seamstress sort of working on a sewing machine for 40, 50 years and gets up in the morning and is like, oh, all stiff and sore. You know, they're not going to do some of those things. They're just not, they're not physically able, or they just think it's silly or irrelevant and so on. And as you say, yeah, it has to be appropriate.
Yeah. And so where do you see yourself, your practice developing and changing or sort of growing in the next 5 years?
Um, I, I really like, and I know that this probably isn't what most people would say. I really like general practice. I really do like general practice.
What do you mean by
Um,
that?
where, you know, people will say is, oh, I'm going to go off and I'm going to specialize in shoulders, or I'm going to specialize in necks, or I'm going to specialize in ankles, or I'm going to do whatever thing it is like that. And I understand that, and I get that, and that's appropriate to that person. But I think, because I love the variety, it is like, if you're in general practice, 8 out of 10 people are going to come in with either lower back pain, mid back pain, back pain. You know, it's kind of what we do. Is, but 20% won't. And I, to me, that 20% makes the other 80% worthwhile, if you know from me, if you know what I mean, because it's that variety of what it is. And again, it's all age groups. I don't really treat babies or small children. It's kind of, you know, mid-teens upwards. I'm absolutely fine with that. You know, 12, 13, 14-year-olds upwards, something like that. But babies and cranial and so on, that's not for me. But that's how I want to see it going forward. Is, or that's what I enjoy. Is,
Yeah.
and the breadth of different things that we do is, you know, I'm never going to be like, I'm only going to do HVTs, or I'm never going to do HVTs. I, I always struggle with that, where people will say, oh, I'm never going to do HVTs. HVTs are appropriate in a certain set of circumstances. And actually, in some of those circumstances, it could be entirely psychological reasons that it's appropriate. Because if that makes the patient feel better and you're not actually doing them any harm, why wouldn't you have that as part of your treatment?
Yeah, and it's an extra tool essentially.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. It's
And
something that, sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Yeah, it's, yes, you say it's an extra tool. It's there if you need to do it. But if you stop doing it, you're going to get out of practice of doing it and you're not going to come back to it.
Yeah, and what was really interesting to hear from you just then was, you know, staying in general practice and treating a broad range of conditions, or, you know, mid-teens and upwards, because a lot of the times I feel I find that most people, one, don't understand what osteopathy is. And then if a layer on that is they don't realize what we can treat and how much we do treat. And it's not just we treat sciatic pain or we treat frozen shoulder or lateral epicondyle. We treat
Hmm.
everything.
Yeah, yeah, completely. It is. It's kind of, everything from the base, from the sort of the, putting aside whether the bones in the skull move or not.
Oh, that's a
Right.
controversial topic in itself. I might have to bring you back to talk about that in
But
itself.
we'll put that to one side. Effectively, everything from the base of your skull to the ends of your toes moves in your body. Everything. Even all the viscera and stuff. Again, not for me, but that's all moving as well. There is nothing in our body that is stuck in one place and designed to stay in one place. And you're absolutely right. We can treat the whole lot of it, everything, the whole way down through the body. We can absolutely treat. And I think is that it's that classic thing, isn't it? People kind of going is like, I've got lower back pain. Why are you fiddling with my knees? Will you leave my ankle alone? Or things like that. And you go, well, actually, this is the reason I'm doing it. And then when you explain it to people, people go, oh, actually, yeah, that makes entire sense.
Because
And I quite like that.
everything is connected.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, where do you see the profession, or where would you like to see the profession heading towards in the next 5, 10 years?
um, I think, as I kind of said earlier, is I think the profession needs to recognize that it needs to become much more evidence-based. I think there are, and that's going to come through regulation. I think that's absolutely going to come through regulation. And you can see it's already starting to flow through regulation and coming through GOSC and so on, as by initially people see it as incredibly restrictive to kind of say, we can only advertise that we can treat these things because they're the only things that are supported by the research to show that we have a positive effect on. And then people say, but I've been doing this for years and my patients really like it. And I think there's a there's a difference between patients liking something and it having a positive effect. I would imagine if you said, well, at the end of the treatment, they pay me and I give a tenner back to them, most patients would like that. I'm not sure that's kind of, you know, supported by research and a positive thing. So I think, and my challenge to people who go there, yeah, but I've got all this thing is like, okay, do some research and demonstrate that that thing that your patient likes is having a positive effect and is having a healing effect. And if you can and show the evidence, that thing that you do suddenly moves on to the list of things that's supported by evidence. It's like, don't keep saying, well, they really like it. Produce the evidence to show that it's got the effect. And suddenly it becomes something we can then justifiably say, we can do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
So, and I, and I think is that we as a profession need to move with that. Um, Otherwise, we're going to be left behind and we're going to be viewed as alternative
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
that. This idea that, and I also think because, you know, I've got two qualifications, which I still have to keep going. I still have to do CPD and osteopathy, and I still have to do my accountancy CPD and so on and so forth. And so I'm a member of two professional bodies, or I pay per subscription to two professional bodies, is my accountancy one and the GOSC one. And they are very, very different in that for the accountancy one, there is an element of protecting the public. So there are certain regulations around audit reports and so on and so forth, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, if somebody does a bad bit of accounting, for want of a better phrase, they're not going to hurt somebody. If we do bad osteopathy, we can physically hurt somebody or actually mint hurt or somebody. GOSC is there to protect the public.
Mm-hmm.
That is their job. That job is not going to change. Their job is not there to promote osteopathy. That is not their job. I mean, that's my understanding of the things. And people moaning and bitching and whinging about GEOS not, promoting, that's not their job. There are certain things which they could do better. Certainly. I mean, I think kind of abdicating responsibility to the Advertising Standards Agency is around what we can and cannot advertise. It's a bit more than kind of, we're not baked beans. It's a bit more complicated than that. So I think there's a bit more work to be done there. But it's for the osteopathic profession to promote the osteopathic profession. And I think it's for the osteopathic profession to demonstrate the benefits of osteopathy. Yeah. And that has to be through data and research and evidence. Yeah. Otherwise we get Trump kind of going, I take malaria tablets because, the bloke in the pub told me it was a good idea. It doesn't count as evidence.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. We as a profession, I suppose, need to drive the research, to drive the evidence, to bring more gravitas to the profession and what we treat and how we treat and why we treat it this way.
Yeah, and I think also is another thing is that I think there has to be is recognition that the other professions, that physiotherapy and chiropractor, in the same way as the osteopathy is, there is really good bits associated with those professions. And there are bits that are not necessarily we would want to take on. And I think there are bits associated with osteopathy, which will be valuable for the others as well. I mean, whilst we do, you would always want to preserve osteopathy essentially as a standalone profession. I'm not convinced that it's in its regulated format. I can see a point in the future where you will have osteopathy, physiotherapy, and chiropractor essentially under a single regulatory body. We've got 3 of them at the moment. Yeah, at some point, somebody will say, why?
Huh.
Yeah. Why is there need for 3 different regulatory bodies? Yeah. When you take away the kind of the how we do it, we're all kind of doing,
Well, the aims are very similar.
Yeah. The what we do.
That's what differs.
Very
how we do it.
similar. Yeah.
But the effect on the body and the person essentially is very similar.
Yeah, it's the how is different between us. And actually, when you kind of split that away, we're not 100% different to each other.
No, and I can see loads of similarities between myself and the physiotherapist that I work alongside. And I'm sure I have not worked with a chiropractor myself, but I'm sure there'll be similarities with them as well.
Yeah, like we call it, HVTs. They chiros call it adjustments, don't they? And I think physios call it something, they call it a grade 5.
Manipulation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing. Don't tell anyone.
Apples and oranges, we're all fruit.
Yeah, exactly.
But on that note, Brian, I'm so thankful for you to, take your time out and spend that time talking to me. And I've learned loads from you. And what I hope,
Thank you.
And this is the whole point of this series of interviews and podcasts, is just to get information out there, spread it around, and not like COVID, let's not do that. But, just share information, and let's all, as a profession, educate each other and all rise up.
Yeah, there was only one thing I wanted to say, and it was coming back to the point that you, at the very outset, where you were saying about students thinking about entering into osteopathy and so on. And there was an experience that I had in clinic in year 4. and it was with my colleague when we used to work when we were doing it, working as pairs, and it was where it was actually his patient, but we'd go in and we'd observe our colleague, and it was something which by the end of the year 4, where I was pretty much running on empty. You get to the end of the year 4 and you're just waiting to get the last day at clinic so you can have some time off, and things absolutely exhausted. So this was about April, May time or something, heading towards the end of the year. And my colleague, he had a patient who had suffered severe trauma in a conflict zone, and he was just in this chap was just in all over pain, and every movement, everything, and had lost a limb and so on, and every movement, every action was painful. And I remember one of the tutors came in and was supporting and helping with this patient, and said, have you tried this, have you tried that, and so on and so forth, etc., etc. And this particular tutor probably has 25 years experience as an osteopath, and with that particular patient, the effect it had on the osteopath, the tutor, with 25 years, how the empathy that tutor had towards that patient. I mean, I was amazed, and I was thinking, like, there are very, very few professions where somebody who's 25 years in, that an instance like that can have such a profound effect on them. And I think that, to me, that said so much about osteopathy. And I'm sure it's the similar in physiotherapy, and I'm sure it's the similar in chiropractor. But, in my other career, I've met accountants and lawyers and solicitors and, professionals who 25 years in are like, oh, for God's sake, is this ever going to end? Whereas with this particular tutor, the effect it had on him, that we weren't able to actually do anything for this patient because he was in such acute pain. I thought that's astounding. I thought, well, 25 years down the line, if I'm still doing osteopathy, I want to have that enthusiasm, and I want to be able to, I want a similar situation to have a similar effect on me. And I thought that was absolutely incredible, and that completely re-energized me at the end of year 4.
Yeah. And I was speaking, I think that's really powerful, because I was speaking to somebody else and they were talking about what a privilege it is to be an osteopath. And that rings true 1 year into graduating or 25. You're always being affected, and you're always affecting other people.
Yeah, so, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Bored. Certainly never bored.
No, you're not, because, and especially with new patients, because you have no idea what's coming through the door. No idea what's coming through the door.
And essentially, you're problem solving all the time, not just even in their consult in their first session, but 3 or 4 sessions in. If something isn't working, okay, you've got to reevaluate your whole management plan and wonder and think, why isn't it working, or what is working? What do we do differently?
Yeah. But the downside of that is, and I'm going to name check the person in this one who said it was something Tom Hewitson said in year 4 when he was teaching us. He said, as an osteopath in clinic, you can never have an off day. You have to be on it, because the day that off day is the day that you will miss the really serious pathology. Because you're, oh, I'm a bit tired today, or, I'm going to have, you can't have that. Yeah. You can't have that.
Absolutely. I love Tom. I'll give him another hug. That's an inside joke. But
when we're allowed to do that again.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. But yeah, I fully agree. And on that note, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Really enjoyable.
And hopefully we'll get to see each other very soon in person.
See you soon. Bye-bye.